Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Create and Consume, a podcast about what we make, watch, and buy in the era of digital content. I'm your host, Austen Tosone. As discussed in one of my recent episode, Autumn Girlies Rise Up, I am having a local girl fall. I have no flights scheduled through the end of the year, and honestly, I'm so happy about that. Aside from a few road trips around the holidays, I am planning to stay put. But I thought it would be a fun time to do an episode about some of my favorite US cities that I visited other than New York. New York comes up all the time in this podcast, and I'm sure I'll plan some other New York specific episodes over the course of hosting this show. And New York is not on this list because, first of all, it's my all time favorite city and I'm extremely biased. And I also wanted to talk about some other cities that maybe you have thought about visiting, or maybe you don't really know that much about, and you kind of wouldn't go unless you hear a little recommendation from a friend to consider them. So that is what today's episode is going to consist of. I'm going to be sharing several cities that I have visited, and I am up to 28 states visited so far. And I feel like I am so grateful to have traveled this much. I would ideally love to do all 50 US states in my lifetime. And I hope this episode inspires you to check out some of the other cities across the country. Before we get started, let me tell you what I've been creating and consuming this week. So, on the creation front, I uploaded a brand new video on my YouTube channel that is basically me reintroducing myself. It is kind of in the style of a get to know you Q&A, but instead of just me sitting in my apartment answering those questions, I actually decided to take the Q&A on the go essentially and bring my new vlog camera around New York City and show off some of the kind of most important spots in the city in terms of my own life milestones. So instead of just talking about, oh, where was your first internship? I'm actually bringing you to the building in the garment district where I had my first internship. I really enjoyed filming this video. I will link it in the show notes in case you'd like to go check it out and give it a watch, especially if you feel like you know who I am as a person today, but maybe you don't know as much about how I got to this point or my background from my earlier years as a content creator and just a young adult. And then, as far as what I'm consuming this week, truly there is so much to talk about television wise. Like, I am very overwhelmed between postseason baseball, the Mets are still in it, go Mets, and between in season football, which I actually got to go to my very first Giants game over the weekend. Maybe you can still hear it in my voice a little bit. I did lose my voice screaming at mostly the offense, who can't seem to get their act together to score more than one touchdown in a game. That was a really fun experience. I shared some photos from that over on my personal Instagram. All of this to say, when I'm not watching sports, what am I watching in between? Currently, Love is Blind season 7. I think so far I have mixed feelings about this season. I do plan on finishing out the series. I saw some people who decided to stop watching after the pods, understandably so, not to give away any spoilers, but they did choose not to follow one of the couples that they featured the most in the pods, which I thought was a very weird decision on their part. I'm sure a lot of people were annoyed and disappointed by that decision, given that when you show so much of someone in the pods, you kind of expect to continue to follow their journey after that. And I think a lot of people were let down by that decision. I personally, like I said, don't understand it, but I am still continuing to watch everything unfold. I don't know. I'm still here for the drama. I'm here for the suspense. There have been some very interesting storylines that have unfolded, and it really is fascinating to see the difference between a dating show on a streaming service like Netflix and then the difference between a TV show on network television like The Bachelor. We talked a little bit about this all the way back in episode 5, which was in my reality TV era. I will link that episode in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, it will be in the description box of this video in case you'd like to hear a bit more of my full scope of how I view reality TV and what I think about various different formats of reality television. But it really is fascinating to see and hear so many different conversations and topics on Love is Blind that you would just never hear discussed on The Bachelor. Things like religion, things like birth control, and, true family planning, not just like all la-di-da, "Oh, our future kids." Like, literally, like, "What's your timeline? How do we work backwards? When should I start, like, getting off of birth control, or should I be on birth control?" True intense conversations like that, meeting the families where the family members don't hold back. I think we all know which parent I'm referencing from this season if you're watching along. But yeah, I think so. The first 9 episodes have come out so far. Very interesting season. I mean, if you want to jump in and watch along, I would say now is the time. But again, there is literally so much television dropping right now. I'm still watching Only Murders. I only watched the first 3 episodes of this latest season that's come out. I'm still technically somewhere in a Felicity rewatch. I don't even, it's been so long since I even have like opened up Hulu and intentionally clicked on Felicity, but I'm somewhere in season 4. I really do actually want to finish out that rewatch just so I can. I'm a completionist. What can I say? Just so I can check it off. But definitely, please let me know what you guys are watching lately. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment underneath the video. You can also comment over on our Instagram or TikTok or send me an email. With that being said, let's move into today's topic of conversation, which is my favorite US cities that I visited so far. So I actually have 9 cities on here. And just so this episode isn't 3 hours long, what I've decided to do is for each city, I'm going to tell you what brought me there, like why I ended up going to that particular city. And I'm going to do a must do, a great view, and a best brew for each city. I was trying to think if there was a fourth thing that I could include that rhymed with those words, but after spending a little too long on whatever the rhyming website is, that's like the Merriam Webster rhyming equivalent, I just was like, let me stop at those 3 things, because for 9 cities, if I have 3 things to say about each one anyway, that is already probably going to be the full length of the episode. So the must do will either be kind of like a popular activity that is recommended when you visit the city, or something that I personally just really enjoyed doing and would suggest that you don't skip. For great view, I'm going to tell you where you can go to get great views of the city. It might be more of like a lookout point, or it might just be some cool spot where you can get a great skyline shot, or where you can, just take your cute Instagram photo. I actually think that's a very important part of traveling, is also documenting your travel experiences. And then I did choose to do a best brew in this series because for me, one of my favorite things to do, one of my favorite ways to explore a city is basically like pretend I'm a local and think about like where I would go after work to get dinner or meet friends for drinks. Like, I just basically like to imagine that I actually live there. So I did include a best brew with some recommendations of restaurants and bars that I think are worth visiting in each city. So now that you've got the rundown of how this will work, let me move on to the first city on my list, which is Cincinnati. And that might seem totally random to you, but I actually love Cincinnati. What's funny about this trip, and the reason that I went there, is I was actually invited on a press trip when I was an editor at Nylon, because they were having a food and wine festival. And on top of that, the tourism board just reached out and said they wanted to, invite me for a few nights to see and enjoy the city. The wine and food festival was kind of like the main selling point of it, but they also kind of set up some other stuff for me to do. And then Nylon folded and I lost access to my email. So I had to like go through LinkedIn, get in contact again with the girl who had invited me, and all my flights and hotels and everything were booked. And I said, hey, like, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to let you know, like, if I'm not answering your emails on my Nylon email, it's because I can't. Like, I'm locked out. I got laid off. So I totally understand if you want to cancel this. But I'm happy to try to like pitch it to other outlets, or at the very least, like cover it for my own blog and YouTube channel. And luckily, they did not cancel my trip. They still invited me to come, and we did everything originally as planned. And I didn't end up being able to place stories in any other publication. All of that to say, I was invited originally on a press trip for Nylon, but what I did end up doing was creating a blog post and YouTube video documenting my weekend in Cincinnati. For my must do in Cincinnati, you have to go to a place called Camp Washington Chili. And you have to ask for a 3-way. It's not that kind of 3-way, okay? Get your mind out of the gutter. What you are ordering when you ask for a 3-way is spaghetti, stay with me here, topped with chili, topped with tons of shredded cheese. And it sounds a little insane, but what it really actually tastes like is a bit more of like a pasta with a bolognese sauce. It was so delicious. It is such a quirky signature Cincinnati thing that I feel like you have to do while you're there. So that's why it is my must do recommendation. If you're looking for a great view of the city, I would highly suggest visiting the top of the park at the Phelps Building. Now, when I went in 2017, this was a rooftop bar on top of, I think it might have been a Marriott hotel originally. So when I looked it up for this podcast episode, it just said the Phelps Building. It looks like the same place. It's a rooftop bar. You have great views of the city on one side and then the river on the other side. So you can actually even see into Kentucky from that viewpoint because Cincinnati is all the way down at the bottom of the Ohio border. And for best brew, I had to mention Rheingeist Brewery. So Rheingeist means ghost of the Rhine, which is the river. And the beer that I had that I really enjoyed was called the Truth IPA. And I was able to do a tour of the brewery while I was there. And the founders said that was actually one of the first recipes they created when they were thinking about opening a brewery. Moving on to the next favorite city on my list, and that is Las Vegas. And you know what? I feel like Las Vegas gets such a bad rap sometimes. And I will be the first to say I am not a clubbing gal. I am not a wear stilettos out all night gal. I am not a gambling gal. And I still absolutely loved Las Vegas. I got invited to Las Vegas on a press trip when I worked at Nylon. This was in the safe zone. I was still working there and I was able to go and write a piece for the website. So everything worked out there on that front. And I was invited by a PR firm that wanted to show off the downtown area of Las Vegas. Obviously, Las Vegas is very well known for the strip, but downtown Las Vegas is one of the coolest parts of the city, I would say. It honestly reminded me so much of Brooklyn. There is street art everywhere. It's very walkable. There's lots of cool, quirky restaurants and fun spots to visit. They have an area called Container Park that's all made out of like repurposed shipping containers. My must do for Las Vegas is the Slotzilla zip line over Fremont Street. And I don't care what you say. You have to do this if you go to Las Vegas. It is essentially a horizontal line that goes over a street. Like you're literally flying over a street and all of the casinos and everything on a zip line several feet in the air, and you fly like Superman style. That is literally one of the most fun things that I've ever done in my whole life. It sounds so crazy, but it was obviously totally safe, and it was just such a fun, unique way to see this street and the area of the city. If you're looking for a great view, you can do the Las Vegas High Roller. That is the Ferris wheel, and I actually do recommend doing this just because you get an incredible view of the city. And it's not your standard Ferris wheel. Like I'm sure you guys have seen, if you've seen this one or the London Eye or the Seattle Great Wheel, it is basically like a glass enclosure. It looks kind of like a clear Easter egg that you can go in. And when we went, the PR firm that was hosting us for the trip also set it up so that we had like champagne in the Great Wheel. I know it's a little cheesy, but I thought it was a fun experience. And then for best brew, I wanted to shout out the Velveteen Rabbit. This is a craft cocktail bar owned by two sisters in the downtown Las Vegas area. It has this like moody interior with all this luxe vintagey looking furniture, and then it also has a bright, beautiful backyard area. So whatever vibe you're going for, you can achieve when you go. And I don't have a particular cocktail to recommend, but I was able to take a cocktail making class when I was there, and everything that we made and sampled was really tasty. Not to mention, I obviously haven't been in a few years. I went in 2017, but they seem to have a growing menu of non-alcoholic and mocktail beverages too. And then I have one random recommendation that pertains to just Las Vegas and Cincinnati. And it's so funny that these are the two cities that have these things, but I just wanted to say that Cincinnati has the American Sign Museum, which is a museum of neon signs. And the Cincinnati Museum is interesting because it's kind of what you'd expect. Like you go into an actual museum and they're all plugged in and lit up. And then in Las Vegas, they have the Neon Museum. This is a totally different experience. You actually walk through like the giant neon signs that used to be above casinos that are no longer operational or working. And it's all outside, and they actually give you umbrellas like to block the sun because it can get really, really hot in the Neon Museum because it's outside and all of that metal is just like baking and like reflecting in the sun. So you're not really going to see lit up signs at the Vegas Museum, but you do walk by like these almost life size, like, 6 feet tall neon signs. And it's very cool to see and hear the history of. So that's just one random thing I had to throw in that just happens to pertain to both Cincinnati and Las Vegas. So that's why I just started with them and wanted to tell you about their neon sign museums. Moving right along, let's talk about Chicago. Now, the first time I went to Chicago was in 2017. My mom and I just wanted to do a girls' trip, a girls' weekend. We hadn't really done a trip like that before, just the two of us. And this was at the time when I was kind of just starting to become friends with Caitlin, who I'm sure you all know by now. So I had reached out and asked for like some recommendations for the area, and we had such a fun time. And I've since been back twice, once to visit Caitlin and once for a family wedding. I think Chicago is my most revisited city on this list, so I definitely feel the strongest about the recommendations that I want to share. To start out with, my must do is actually the Chicago Christkindl Market. So that means that you'll want to plan your Chicago visit during the holidays. I visited Caitlin last year during Christmas time and she brought me to the market. We honestly just had so much fun walking around. We got to try and sample lots of different foods. We got hot chocolate. There were also really cute ornaments and local makers and artisans there. I feel like this really is one of the quintessential parts of Chicago, and we were able to go, I think, on a weekday morning, so it wasn't super crowded. I could have gone a few different directions for great view in Chicago. Obviously, there are a lot of iconic viewpoints, but I feel like if you're a first timer visiting, I would recommend the Riverwalk, which is basically just the entire area along the Chicago River. You can simply just walk through the area. You can walk along the river. There are also restaurants that you can stop at that are seated like right on the river that might have patios or outdoor areas where you have a view. And another great way to see more of the city is to book an architecture cruise. My mom and I did that back in 2017 when we first visited, and we got to learn more about all of the major buildings in the city, and we got to see the city from the river, which was really fun. For the best brew in Chicago, I had to shout out the Green Line Pale Ale at Goose Island. So Goose Island actually recently opened a location in Chicago called the Salt Shed Pub. And this is like a brand new, beautiful brew pub. It has a flexible indoor outdoor area. So we were actually able to sit outside when we last went. I went with Caitlin and Andrew when we visited back in May. So yeah, definitely order the Green Line Pale Ale and also get a side of cheese curds. I know that's not technically a brew, but I feel I had to mention them for an authentic Midwestern experience. Next, I want to talk about Seattle. So I had never been to the Pacific Northwest before, and my cousin Caitlin moved out to Seattle a few years ago. So it seemed like the perfect time to not only explore a new area of the country, but also pay her a visit. Andrew and I went to Seattle together in 2019 to visit her and do some exploring. My must-do recommendation in Seattle is going to be Pike Place Market. And I went back and forth about this. Like, is it too touristy? Is it a cop-out? And I really feel like it's not. I really feel like it is such a great activity to do in Seattle, especially just something that you can do in the morning, afternoon, evening. It really doesn't matter. Like, you can slot it in wherever in your schedule. It will work throughout the day. Pike Place Market is also nearby the original Starbucks. So if that's something that you wanted to check off in your Seattle itinerary, you are right across the street from it. And the market itself is just really fun. You can watch people throw fish in the produce and seafood section. You can walk through the flower section, and you can check out all of the other local vendors in the marketplace. I do not suggest going to see the gum wall, which is in the alleyway behind Pike Place Market, because I'm sorry, that's disgusting. Like, I tried to take a photo there and I was trying to like see if I could find a way to make it cute and like not cringy. And I just could not get over how grossed out I was about the whole thing. Like, ooh, okay. I'm literally just like shrinking into myself just thinking about it. So feel free to skip that. You're not missing much. For great view, I do think it is worth a visit to the top of the Space Needle, especially if you're a first time visitor to Seattle. The Space Needle really is a perfect 360-degree view of the city. You can't can't beat it. And right underneath is the Choluli Glass Gardens. So if you wanted to throw in a little something else there and kind of do two birds in one location, that is a great spot to visit in Seattle. For best brew, I'm going to recommend the Sky Kraken beer from Fremont Brewing. Fremont was my favorite neighborhood that we visited in Seattle while we were there. We stayed in an Airbnb for, I think, 2 nights of our trip, and we absolutely loved that area. I think my cousin might have also served the Sky Kraken at her wedding. I know she had a bunch of beers from local breweries because she and her husband are a big fan of the beer scene in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. So, Caitlin, if you happen to be listening, confirm for me if the Sky Kraken was at your wedding. And if you don't remember, ask Chris because I guarantee he remembers. Let's move on and talk about Austen. I mean, how could I not love a city that shares my name, even with the different spelling? So, just to clarify, by the way, I am named after Jane Austen, the author. That's why my name is spelled with an E. But I do find that when I introduce myself to people, like if it's kind of loud or they can't hear me and I say Austin and they're like, what? Awesome. If I'm like Austin, Texas, they're always like, oh, okay. When I was living in Brooklyn, my roommates and I decided we wanted to take a trip together because obviously we all lived together. It would be easy to like split Ubers to and from the airport. And we all happened to have off for President's Day weekend. So this was in like February 2018 that we went to Austin. I don't know if this will surprise people or not. You'll either be really into this recommendation or really against this recommendation, but my must do suggestion in Austin is to go dancing at a honky tonk. I mean, duh. While we were there, we went to a bar called the White Horse, and it was so much fun. And mind you, like, I am not a big cowgirl. Like, I don't know how to square dance or line dance or whatever. And we still had an absolute blast. That was a fun bar too, because they also had an outdoor area. So if you want to take a break from the dancing and just like have a beer on the patio, you can absolutely do so. But the live music scene is just so fun in a city like Austin. You can't not participate a little bit. For great view, I put down the sign in front of the Austin Motel. So this is not really like a skyscraper-y photo, but to me, if you're going to take a cute picture in Austin, you want the sign so people know exactly where you are. If you know what I'm talking about, the Austin Motel sign is like this big red vertical sign that says Austin Motel. It is so cute. And I did take a picture by the motel sign. I was wearing my denim fringe jacket and a denim mini skirt, obviously denim on denim moment for Texas. And then my best brew, this is not for everyone. Let me just start by saying that. And as a reminder, I was there when I was 23 years old, but I have to recommend the Mimosa at Bangers in the Rainy Street Historic District, just because if you're ever going to drink a mimosa that contains an entire bottle of champagne, you should do it out at brunch in Austin, Texas. So this is not a drink that you drink quickly. This is like you get there and that is your drink for the 2 hours that you're at the restaurant. Okay. So do not rush the mimosa and do not go for the mimosa if you don't think you can handle it. Once again, it is a gigantic mimosa that contains an entire bottle of champagne, but it's just such a bizarre, unique concept that I obviously had to mention it. Moving on to another southern city. Actually, the next two are both southern cities, but let's start out with Savannah, Georgia. My friend Alexa and I decided to take a girls' trip a few years ago together, and we ended up doing Savannah and Charleston in one trip. I absolutely fell in love with Savannah. It is just such a beautiful historic city. I loved how walkable it was. I loved how fun it was. As far as my must do in Savannah, I would look into making a reservation at the Old Pink House. That's old with an E at the end of it. Okay, so you know we're not messing around. And definitely look into this as early as you find out you're going to Savannah. Like, do it well in advance because it does book up quickly. Basically, this is just like quintessential Southern cuisine in a beautiful historic home. Like, it was definitely one of our most memorable nights of the trip. We ate really delicious food. We also wore pink, obviously, to match the exterior and take photos, but more than that, it was just a really wonderful meal. The food was top quality, the service was top quality, and the atmosphere was so nice. In terms of a great view, I kind of wanted to mix in a little something different for this one because Savannah doesn't really have any like skyscrapers or crazy viewpoints, so to speak. But my favorite way to see the city was actually by doing a trolley tour. So we booked a hop on, hop off trolley tour of the city. And especially, I think our first day we did like a lot of walking. And our second day, we were like spiritually ready to go sightseeing, but physically just like so tired. And this was a great way to see all of the city as much as we could with several different stops along the way without actually having to like walk everywhere. So I would definitely suggest that, like for the second day of your trip when you're tired of walking. I want to say Lex and I did this trip in 2018, and I still have a picture of this best brew that I'm going to recommend to you on my phone because I loved it so much when I tried it. I actually tried to order some to like my apartment, and there was something about they couldn't ship the beer to different states depending on liquor laws, but like whatever. If you're ever in Georgia, do yourself a favor and try to order a Southbound Brewing Hoplin IPA. Sorry, let me say that one more time. Southbound Brewing Hoplin IPA. This is truly just one of my favorite IPAs that I've ever tried. Like, it was just so flavorful. It was really smooth. I don't know how else to explain it other than I literally tried to order some for myself to have in New York after trying it. So that's how much I liked it. Also, shout out to Savannah for being an open container city. I just was able to like take my beer and walk around. Next on my list is New Orleans. And I did this trip with Andrew. I think we might have just done like a 4 day or 5 day trip. I think we just did it over a long weekend. We both had never been to New Orleans before and were interested in going to check it out. We actually went in October, which I would strongly recommend. I feel like that was the perfect time to go because it wasn't too chilly yet, but it was no longer humid from the summer months. So it was just a really comfortable temperature to walk around. I think the obvious must do in New Orleans is just to eat and drink in the French Quarter. This is the historic center of the city, and you can get beignets from either Cafe du Monde or Cafe Beignet. We were able to try both, and honestly, like, equal quality and enjoyment from my perspective. I'm certainly not like a dessert connoisseur at all, but I really enjoyed both of the beignets that we tried. And obviously, go out for a drink on Bourbon Street, maybe just pace yourself. I feel like that's the best and only advice that there is on a street that's called Bourbon Street, but people will have their fun. My favorite view in the city of New Orleans was definitely in Jackson Square Park. You have a great shot of the St. Louis Cathedral, which just looks like a giant castle, honestly. It's really beautiful, and you're just kind of in the town square. You get to do great people watching. There's always like fun street vendors who pop up around the perimeter of the park too. I know we got our tarot cards read. I know Andrew didn't want me to do that. He was like, that seems like a waste of money, but was it? Even though I don't remember a word she said, was it a waste of money? I don't think so. Now, for best brew, there were obviously a lot of options in New Orleans, but I didn't really want to recommend anything too crazy. You're probably like, Austin, 2 cities ago, you recommended that we order a mimosa with an entire bottle of champagne in it. That was a younger me, okay? This trip happened like 18 months after that. So I matured in that time. But speaking of mimosas, the mimosas at Broussard's in the French Quarter, where Andrew and I went for brunch one day of our trip, was just like the best mimosa I've ever had. The ratio was perfect. It was made with like fresh orange juice. And not only that, but the entire meal was delicious. There was a jazz band walking around during brunch. Like, the whole vibe was right, but just like taking a sip of that type of mimosa just made me feel like I was, in an episode of Gossip Girl. Like, it was the richest tasting mimosa that I've ever had in my life, and I really, really recommend it. Okay, 2 more cities left. Next up is Boston. So 2 summers ago, Andrew and I decided we wanted to do just like a summer road trip. So we decided to do like a Wednesday through Sunday situation. I remember we actually drove up Wednesday night to Connecticut. We stayed overnight with my sister-in-law, and then we drove in the morning to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, just to kind of like break up the drive. I didn't put Portsmouth on this list because I feel like it's like a smaller town, maybe. Like, I'm trying to think of major cities for this episode, but I kind of want to also do like a small towns in the US not to miss episode. So if you guys would be interested in that, please let me know. I can definitely add it to my list to circle back on. So anyway, we did 2 nights in Portsmouth and then 2 nights in Boston, and I was actually able to collaborate with a hotel there, so that kind of made it work out in our favor to book the trip as well. And we had an absolute blast. So the must do when you're in Boston is to go to a Red Sox game. Now, I am not really a fan of the Red Sox. And actually, so Andrew is a Yankees fan. My dad is a Mets fan. So, in general, I'm just out here rooting for New York. We did actually pick this weekend that we went to Boston because the Yankees were playing the Red Sox at Fenway Park. But I would strongly suggest going to Fenway anyway because it is one of the oldest baseball stadiums still in America. A lot of other cities have updated their stadiums over the years. Like in New York, we used to have Shea Stadium for the Mets, and they opened Citi Field in like 2009 ish, if I'm remembering correctly. Fenway is still like original stadium, so much history there. Very small seats, I will say. If legroom is a concern, just something to note. But going to a game there just was like felt like a true American pastime. I don't know how else to explain it. It made me feel very like patriotic or something. And thank God the Yankees won. I was nervous like showing up to that game even wearing a Yankees t-shirt, but luckily, it all worked out. The next night, the Yankees got creamed, though, so it was really lucky we picked the night that we did. Now, for great view in Boston, there is a lot to cover there. There's so many different neighborhoods, so many different viewpoints I could suggest, but similar to what I was saying in Savannah, how we were able to do that trolley tour, I would actually really suggest doing the guided Freedom Trail tour in Boston because you get to see so many important historical sites along the Freedom Trail path. We had a guide who was dressed up like a revolutionary soldier. Like, we just committed to the bit. We had a blast with it, and we got to see so much along the way. So my brother-in-law lives in Rhode Island, and he actually met up with Andrew and I to do the Freedom Trail tour, and then we went to a brewery after, which brings me to Best Brew in Boston. I wanted to recommend at Night Shift Brewery the Fluffy Hazy IPA. Not only was this beer delicious, but the brewery is, I guess it's technically up in like the north end of Boston, and it's right on the waterfront. If it's a nice day, you can sit out and see the harbor, I believe, in front of you. And the brewery inside is extremely spacious. There was lots of seating, very like clean, modern looking place. And they had really good bar snacks and stuff too. So we just sat there and hung out for a few hours and had a great time. And last but not least, let's give a little shout out to the great city of San Francisco. So I have actually been to San Francisco twice. I went once with my parents when I was 9, but most recently I went in 2022 with Andrew because he ran the Big Sur Marathon. So the marathon was in Monterey, California. So that was what initially brought us out to the West Coast. He ran the marathon. We did a few days in Napa, and then we did 2 days in San Francisco at the end of our trip. I have to say, San Francisco is the city that reminds me the most of New York, just like people wise and vibe wise. Every time I saw a group of friends at like a restaurant or just out and about, I felt like they could be my friends. I just got like a good feeling and a good vibe from all the San Franciscans. So obviously there is a ton that you could do in San Francisco, but I was trying to think about something that felt very quintessential to San Francisco's identity. And for that reason, I would honestly recommend ordering a sourdough soup bowl at Boudin, Boudin. They have a location on Fisherman's Wharf, which is a very, touristy, popular area of the city. I got a tomato soup inside of a sourdough bread bowl, and it was honestly so delicious and satisfying. San Francisco sourdough, I mean, they're known for that, obviously. For a great view, if you want to get a clear shot of you with the Golden Gate Bridge like behind you, what you can do is drive through, I wrote down Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Now, the way Andrew explained this to me is because we were driving into San Francisco from the north, coming from Napa. We basically drove down to like by Sausalito area, and then we drove down kind of on this windy path, and we were able to pull over to this viewpoint of the bridge. And that is where we personally stopped to take our photos. So I did want to mention that. There's certainly other places and viewpoints where you can see the Golden Gate Bridge. I do think that getting a shot with the bridge is pretty iconic. And then I couldn't really recall anything specifically amazing that we drank in the city center. So for best brew, I would honestly just say any glass of wine from a local winery, either like in the Napa or Sonoma region. You just really can't go wrong with it. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I enjoyed being your travel agent for the day, honestly. I have a lot of fun planning trips and sharing suggestions with people, and I'm super excited to continue to explore some more US cities and states in my lifetime. If any of these cities are also on the top of your list, or you have any other cities to add that you love, please, again, leave a comment over on Instagram, send me a DM, send me an email, carrier pigeon, however you prefer to contact me. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. As a reminder, you can support Create and Consume for free by doing any of the following. You can leave us Apple and Spotify ratings and reviews. You can like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you're watching over on YouTube. You can follow along at Create and Consume Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. You can send this episode to a friend who might enjoy it. And don't forget to check out createandconsumepodcast.com for episode recaps and more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.